Welcome to The Making of Madrid, a podcast about everything to do with life in Madrid, covering history, culture, food, and much more. The show is presented by me, Felicity Hughes, tour guide, Madrid resident, and freelance journalist. The noise that you can hear, the rather rowdy noise you can hear, by the way, was recorded last year at the Entierro de la Sardina, the burial of the sardine. Now, this weird festival takes place on Ash Wednesday, and it celebrates the culmination of Carnival, although strictly speaking, it's actually the start of Lent. And yet, it's a huge bacchanal, because if you go to my Instagram, you'll be able to see the video that accompanies this sound. And you've got people partying in the streets with cans of beer in their hand, dancing and having a good old time, which isn't strictly endorsed by the Catholic Church, because on Ash Wednesday, of course, you're supposed to have the somber ash cross on your forehead and be looking very, very serious, and beginning with your Lent fast, not eating meat, certainly not indulging in alcohol and dancing on the streets. This year, the Entierro de la Sardina takes place on Wednesday, March the 5th. And it's not only in Madrid that it's celebrated, it's also celebrated in the Canary Islands, in Catalonia, and Murcia. But in Murcia, it's a little bit different. Now, Madrid holds a bit of a special claim to the burial of the sardine, because we think that the ritual originated in the 18th century in the capital, when King Carlos III gave the noblemen in his court some sardines to eat during the Lent period. Unfortunately, those sardines turned up completely rotten, and the stench was so bad they had to bury these sardines on the banks of the Manzanares. And this is the culmination of the procession of the burial of the sardine. This is when we bury the sardine, well, the sort of effigy of the sardine, by the banks of the Manzanares River. But this isn't the only theory about the burial of the sardine. Now, some people say that the sardine is not a sardine, as in a piece of fish, but it's actually a slice of bacon. And the burying the sardines symbolizes people burying the food that they're not allowed to eat during Lent. However, interestingly, Murcians, don't celebrate the burial of the sardine on Ash Wednesday. They bury their sardine during a spring festival, and it symbolizes the triumph of joy over seriousness. Maybe one of the reasons why the history of this festival is a little bit hazy is that it was prohibited for a really long time. So after the Civil War, Franco was quite down on any kind of celebration or fiestas that contained any sort of hint of the pagan. So Carnival became really somber, and certainly occasions like the burial of the sardine would be prohibited. And it wasn't revived as a tradition until 1967, when the dictatorship began to loosen up a little bit. And the Merry Brotherhood of the burial of the sardine was formed. Their honorary first member, is actually Francisco de Goya. And this is because Goya's painting of the burial of the sardine, which can be found in the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, is absolutely an emblematic work that symbolizes the spirit of this festival. And I think that the people who revived the traditions used it as a great reference point for how they would dress and how they would behave, as a very typical for members of the Merry Brotherhood of the Sardine are that they wear these black cloaks that are really, really beautiful. They're traditional black cloaks. Women are also members of the Brotherhood. And the women tend to wear these lovely net veils, and the men wear top hats. And they're quite a jolly bunch. People of all ages are members, and they have tons and tons of fun at this festival. In any case, Goya's painting is really interesting from the point of view of understanding Goya's artwork, because art historians are a little bit divided on exactly when this painting was painted. So it contains elements of two important phases in Goya's development as an artist. So before the Peninsular War, that's before Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, Goya was very famous for painting the working classes of Madrid. He loved his majos and majas. You may have heard of his famous naked maja. So she's a jaunty lady of the street. And this was his very favorite subject. So he liked painting local festivals, lots of joy, youthful exuberance. But the style is rather traditional. There's nothing in it of the black paintings that he was to paint after the Peninsular War, when he was deeply affected by the violence that he witnessed on both sides of the war. It was a very, very traumatic time for Spaniards, as traumatic as the Civil War was. And if you look a bit closer at the painting of the Burial of the Sardine that Goya painted, the faces are not so well formed. It's not so much a realist work of art. They begin to look slightly nightmarish. And as is traditional in Carnival, people are wearing masks. And these masks are slightly ominous. The faces are distorted. And this really contains the psychological darkness that Goya carried with him after this war, after he'd witnessed so much violence between Spanish people and French troops. Masks, incidentally, were worn during Carnival to ward off spirits of criminals who had died violently. But of course, this all ties into the fact that Franco would not have liked these kind of celebrations at all, because they really contain shadows of pagan festivities, which of course ties into the Murcian thing, where you have the Festival of the Sardine as something to celebrate the end of winter and the joyous start of spring. Before I move on to tell you a little bit more about the Alegre Cofradia del Entierro de la Sardina, the joyful brotherhood of the burial of the sardine, I just want to take a little digression and say that if you do go and see Goya's painting, it's a fantastic experience, because the Real Academia de Bellas Artes San Fernando has a wonderful selection of Goya's artwork. But not only that, it has a wonderful selection of work by Spanish masters, such as Zuberan, Pedro de Ribera, who I love, who has these lovely dark brooding paintings. And if you find that the crowds in the Prado are giving you a bit of a headache, you will breathe a huge sigh of relief when you go to this place, because it's a little secret place that not many people know about, and yet is full of really fantastic works from the Siglo de Oro, the golden age of Spanish art. So, getting back to the Alegre Cofradia del Entierro de la Sardina, founded in 1967, they actually have headquarters in the Rastro area, and they're located on Calle de Rodrigo de Guevara, number 4. And here they keep a fantastic little collection of the coffins in which the sardine is buried. And these coffins are works of art in themselves. So some of them have little fish skeletons on. Some of them are paying an homage to Goya's original painting. Others have a bit of a steampunk aesthetic. In fact, in general, I find this guild to have a very steampunky type aesthetic in their cloaks and top hats, and they wear these lovely little sardine pins. They look like a bunch of people who know how to have a good time. If you want to check out those coffins, you can visit their website, which I'll put a link to that website in the show notes and in my blog. And you can check out the pictures of all the past coffins that go all the way back to 1967, when they were finally allowed to get out on the streets and have a jolly good time. So on the day of the burial of the Sardine, they all parade around town. And this is a little bit more sober than what's to follow in the afternoon, because this is when the party really starts. The procession begins at Plaza de San Antonio de la Florida at 5:30, and here they pay their respects to Goya. The procession actually starts outside the hermitage of San Antonio of la Florida, and this is a fantastic place to go if you love Goya's art, because the ceiling is covered in frescoes that depict the life of the saint, but are also teeming with the local majos and majas that he loved so much. And luckily, there's a nice mirror there that you can use to look up at the frescoes. Now, you need to make sure you go to the right one, because this church actually has an exact copy of it right next door. And that's because the people coming to worship in it get so annoyed by people coming in to gawp up at Goya's artworks that they finally decided to make a copy. So do go into the right one. It's very clearly marked, so you shouldn't get confused. So once they've paid their respects to Goya and his great frescoes, the procession goes along the Manzanares River, and it's accompanied by gigantes y cabezudos, so giants and big heads, quite literally. These are commonly seen in Spanish festivals. They're usually made of papier-mâché. It's a tradition that you often see in Italy as well. And if you want to take a look at these figures close up, you can actually go to the Museum of Arts and Popular Traditions, which is coincidentally right around the corner from the headquarters of the Alegre Cofradia del Entierro de la Sardina in the Rastro area, so a very, very staunchly working class, typically Madrileñan area. And the thing I love about this museum as well is that they have a corrala that was built in 1840. And you can see this traditional style of Madrileñan architecture. So it's a building built around a courtyard, which acts as a sort of air conditioning in the summer months, when the shade from the surrounding buildings keeps the courtyard fresh. And they generally have a stone trough in the middle. And often they put on plays, well, they used to put on plays in these corralas. And this one in particular still does keep up that tradition. So occasionally you will have plays shown in that corrala. It's a great museum where you can see all different kinds of artifacts from Spanish folk traditions, but particularly go and see the gigantes and cabezudos. It's a little bit creepy if you go on your own, because you're surrounded by these giant figures. And it's another museum that not many people tend to go to and is quite quiet. So yeah, if you get easily freaked out, perhaps take a friend to go with. Anyway, the joyful procession parades through the streets. Everyone's dancing, laughing, joking around. 4 men at the front are carrying the little sardine coffin, which has chains attached to it. And as I said before, each year the coffin is different. It's a real little work of art, and I think they try and top themselves each year. So each year the coffin gets more fantastical and interesting. And the whole thing culminates in the Casa de Campo Park by the Pajarito Fountain at Plaza de Moreras. So this is where the Sardine is finally buried. And the burial is accompanied by a huge fire in which you purge your past vices. While, of course, everybody is already kind of indulging in their present day vices. But of course, Spain is no longer such a Catholic country as it was. Catholicism is embedded in the culture, and yet not a lot of people go to church anymore. I just saw my husband's grandmother, who's a lovely old lady who is very devout, and she'd just come back from church, and we asked her how it was, and she said, well, it's just the same as ever. Lots of old people like me, and nobody really below retirement age, which is really typical these days, I suppose. But it's hard to mourn that passing when you think about the days when such lively, fun events like the burial of the Sardine were effectively banned because of a very austere dictatorial regime. Anyway, that's about it from me for today. It's been a fairly short one, but I hope a little bit of fun. Please do go down to the Manzanares River at 5:30 and take part in this whole thing. If you can find yourself a nice cape, don a cape, but it doesn't matter. You can come as you are and you'll have a blast, I assure you.